Greetings and various assorted salutations. Today we talk about how to end the world, or nuclear weapons in the Cold War and their politics. Essentially, the way this lecture is going to work is it's going to break down how nuclear weapons can be used and a little bit in the Cold War of what nuclear weapons meant and the arms race around them. So that's what we're getting into. So, in 1945, the city-destroying atomic bombs were only in America, and there weren't that many of them, quite frankly. The U.S. saw this weapon, the H-bomb, as the biggest advantage possible. If the Soviets dared, the United States of America could wipe them off the face of the earth, and the Soviets would be powerless to stop them. It was a nice monopoly for the Americans while it lasted, I suppose. Russia gets the bomb in August 29th, 1949 is when they test their first one, and it works. We have an activity in this class that'll go into how they got the bomb. It's a combination of espionage, defecting physicists, and pure Soviet determination when they developed their own city-destroying bombs. Because remember, with nuclear weapons, somebody is on the receiving end of those bombs. And so with the U.S. feeling a great sense of security, the Soviets felt a great sense of fear. And that's what drove them to develop their own weapons. Notably, this will spoil the ambitions of the U.S. and the U.K., which had planned to nuke the Soviets before they got nukes. The thing that saved the Soviets was the fact that the U.S. could not produce bombs fast enough to wipe all of the Soviet Union off the face of the earth. That's kind of a disturbing thought. Anyways, this is going to be the foundation of the Cold War. Both sides have nukes, both have competing ideologies, and both will develop nuclear weapons in an arms race in an effort that theoretically could wipe all humans off the face of the earth. We call the age after World War II the Atomic Age, just as much as we call it the Cold War. For through the nuclear era, through the development of nuclear weapons, we develop other nuclear things like nuclear power. And this arms race is going to result between the U.S. and the Soviets developing better and more powerful nuclear weapons. The central themes of this arms race is building better weapons, better as in more effective, more powerful, more destructive, faster, harder to catch, harder to stop, things like that. To kind of give you an idea how destructive, most of these weapons will become far more powerful than the bombs dropped in Japan. Nuclear testing is also a political tool as well. Nuclear weapons were easy to detect when you're testing them. Every time you detonate a nuclear warhead, the radiation around the world goes up a little bit. And so testing nuclear warheads is a way of reminding people of, hey, we're working on a better one. The ways to deploy nukes here is where things get interesting. Nuclear weapons were made increasingly more and more mobile. The Soviets, for example, had a fondness for submarines and train-launchable nukes. But there were other ways as well. The ultimate nuclear weapon, though, is the ICBM. All these are fascinating ways of deploying nuclear weapons, but the ICBM is, well, you could call it the ultimate way of deploying a nuclear weapon. It's short for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. These missiles are actually a byproduct of the space race. Instead of launching a rocket up into space with a satellite or people, why not load it with nukes, plural, and have it aimed downwards after its launch? These missiles can be placed pretty much anywhere in the world, and to this day there's really no convenient, consistent way of being able to shoot down the missiles. The only way to prevent an ICBM launch is to either not trigger the launch or figure out where the nuke is and prevent it from ever launching. both of which are tricky. Because these missiles can be placed anywhere in the world, and they can hit anything in the world in 30 minutes. So, for example, South Dakota used to have nuclear missiles. North Dakota still has nuclear missiles because no one notices these places. The Americans and the Soviets will go through cycles of what is called a policy of brinkmanship, where they would push the development, push the situation as far as they could go, like in a game of chicken, to see who would crack first before backing down. Given the fact that I'm recording this lecture video now in the 21st century, it appears that the policy of brinkmanship never turned over from the Cold War into a hot war. But here's some pictures of different nuclear things. This is a fun little sign. In the time you could get a pizza, you could launch a nuke. But, so, a couple other details. To escalate things a little bit, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, the two rival factions that I've discussed in a previous lecture, also added another caveat. The USSR stated that if the Soviet Union was invaded or any of the Warsaw member countries were invaded, they would use nuclear weapons like they were regular bombs. Many military commanders, especially in the 50s and 60s, wanted to use nuclear weapons because they're like, oh, these are really big bombs. They're perfect. But we will look at the concept of escalating, like in the policy of brinkmanship and the future unit with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Essentially what happened is the United States wanted to put nukes in Turkey, so the Soviets put nukes in Cuba. And after the incident, we both agreed the Soviets wouldn't put nukes in Cuba, and we wouldn't put nukes in Turkey. But no. What you're seeing on the slide here is some different things on how nuclear weapons can be used in a combat situation or a political situation. Politics, test them, reminds people. A few of these things. Oh, I do have to mention a few non-combatant uses. Before people realized radiation was a bad thing, there were some proposals on how to use nukes for things like road construction, landing on the moon, Panama Canal, put out fires. Actually, that one does work. You can put out massive fires with nuclear weapons. There are problems with the fallout, but you can put out a fire with a nuclear weapon. Powering spacecraft, fracking, shooting asteroids. There's all kinds of uses. In 1950s Americana, there's kind of this imagination of the nuclear-powered future. You have to keep in mind this is also the future that people thought asbestos was a great form of clothing. So a lot of people didn't realize the dangers of some of the technologies that were in use. Let's talk about MAD. Mutually Assured Destruction. As the Cold War progresses, the Soviet Union and the United States reach a point where if you launch nuclear missiles, say in trying to take out your opponent first, it will succeed, but they will launch their nukes in return. The idea behind mutually assured destruction is that both sides have so many nukes that you, one, can't find them all, two, you can't destroy them all, and so if you attack first, the other side will attack with all their nukes. And it doesn't matter if it's the Soviets or the Americans. If one side shoots, the other side shoots, and it's game over. Nukes everywhere. And the argument behind the MAD Doctrine as a way of keeping peace is that if both sides want to actually continue living, they won't use nukes on each other. That's the idea behind it. And the idea of trying to find all the nukes and disable them before launching the nukes, it's just untenable. The Soviets had all of the Warsaw Pact to move nuclear missiles around on trains. The oceans have submarines. In America, we have places like Rapid City, South Dakota, where most Californians can't even find us. And so the Soviets might struggle too. This will get to a fun little side activity that you can look at if you want, with the Strategic Air Command. Essentially, in the great state of South Dakota, we built nuclear-proof bunkers to hide nuclear missiles in, and in the event that the Soviets attacked, we could launch these missiles out of ranchers' fields in South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, etc. But anyways, if the next time you're driving through one of those states and you see a random fenced-off area, that may be a nuclear missile silo, or it may be a former nuclear missile silo. But no. Now, of course, all this being said, nuclear weapons are kind of problematic. Their destructive power is so absolute that you really can't get rid of nuclear weapons. I know there's been times to get rid of them, and there's been talks of reducing them, but one of the reasons why people often governments back away from those talks, is because once the nukes are gone, Mad Doctrine falls apart. And while a lot of people don't like Mad Doctrine, the threat of violence, counter-violence, is a good threat to violence in human history. Nuclear weapons incentivize the Soviets and the Americans to avoid direct military conflict as much as possible, at all costs. This is why this time period is called the Cold War. It never becomes a hot war like World War I or World War II. We'll talk about it in other activities and other lectures, but the Soviets and the Americans are going to fight proxy wars where they will prop up different factions, like the North Koreans versus the South Koreans, the North Vietnamese versus the South Vietnamese, Greek communists versus Greek non-communists, things like that. Instead of fighting each other directly, the Soviets and the Americans build alliances and diplomatic relations in places like the Middle East, and they try and use their economies and cultures to outperform one another. Mad Doctrine is part of the reason for world peace, the fact that we didn't get a World War III. But one of the things you have to keep in mind with Mad Doctrine is that we can only say Mad Doctrine worked for the Cold War because, one, the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union ended, and two, both sides did not want themselves to be wiped off the face of the earth, and so they had a strong motivation to not end the world. And it's kind of hard to imagine living in this modern era, but there was a period of time where the mad world, where people didn't know when the Soviets or when the Americans might strike, because it was a known fact with Mad Doctrine that if one side took the shot, the other side would spend its dying breath firing back, and that would be the end. But since the Cold War ended and the world did not end, I guess that means we will have to continue U.S. history into the next unit. So, until later.